The sheriff's cruiser was pulling into my driveway when I realized this HOA Karen had just screwed herself royally. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been peacefully hammering dock boards, the sound echoing across Eagle Lake's mirror-smooth water, when this blonde bulldozer in a white Lexus came screeching up my gravel drive, the reek of her expensive perfume mixed with burning rubber as she slammed her door. "You have exactly 10 minutes to pack your junk and get out!" Priscilla Vandermeer shrieked, designer heels clicking on my wooden steps. "This is HOA property now!" I set down my hammer, coffee still warm in my thermos. "Ma'am, my family's owned this land since 1952. "Not anymore!" She speed-dialed frantically. 911, I need police. There's a vagrant destroying lakefront property. As red and blue lights flashed through the pine trees, I couldn't help but grin. This woman had no clue she'd just called the cops on someone who owned way more than a simple lakeside cabin. What would you do if some HOA lunatic tried to steal your family legacy? Tell me where you're watching from and share your wildest neighbor nightmare. Let me back up and tell you how this nightmare started. My name's Thaddeus Brennan, Thad to anyone who matters, and I'm a third-generation owner of this little slice of heaven on Eagle Lake. My grandfather built this cabin in 1952 with cedar logs he cut himself, and on humid mornings you can still smell that sweet wood mixed with decades of coffee and campfire smoke. I spent 30 brutal years on Gulf oil rigs, dodging hurricanes and equipment that could turn you into hamburger without warning. Saved every penny while breathing diesel fumes and salt spray, came home covered in crude more times than I can count. When Dad passed last year, I inherited our family sanctuary, the one place on earth where I could finally breathe easy. I'm about as humble as they come. Drive a rusted F-150 that backfires like a shotgun, wear flannel shirts until they fall apart, and my idea of fine dining is fresh bass cooked over an open fire. To look at me, you'd figure I was just another broke retiree counting pennies. Eagle Lake used to be a working man's paradise. For 60 years, families who built these cabins with their own hands raised kids who learned to swim off these docks. The sound of laughter echoing across the water, the smell of fish frying at sunset, that was our community. Then the parasites arrived. 5 years ago, luxury development started infecting our shoreline like a disease. Property taxes exploded, forcing out families whose roots ran 3 generations deep. The peaceful morning sounds of loons and gentle waves got drowned out by the roar of bulldozers and the stench of diesel exhaust. That's when the Lakeside Estates HOA materialized, led by Dallas transplant Priscilla Vandermeer. This woman makes a rattlesnake look cuddly. She's never worked a day in her pampered life, drives a Lexus that costs more than most people's houses, and reeks of perfume so toxic it could strip paint. Her husband Richard owns the development company systematically destroying our community, and she appointed herself HOA dictator without a single vote. The woman wears tennis outfits everywhere despite never touching a racket, talks to locals like we're her servants, and has the personality of a paper cut soaked in lemon juice. My wake-up call came on a Tuesday that started perfect. Crisp air, coffee steaming in my thermos, loons calling across glass-smooth water. I returned from town with supplies for dock repairs to find a neon orange violation notice zip-tied to my pier like a death warrant. Unauthorized structure, non-compliant landscaping, unapproved dock materials. $500 daily fine starting immediately. 30 days to comply or face aggressive legal action. The paper rattled in the lake breeze like a threat. My blood pressure spiked as I called county records. Dolores, who'd known my family since dirt, whispered urgently, "Thad, your property's been legally registered since 1952. This HOA paperwork appeared overnight claiming authority over parcels they never owned. Something's rotten here." Being a reasonable man, I drove to Priscilla's gaudy McMansion, a marble monstrosity that looked like Vegas threw up on a wedding cake. She answered in a silk robe at 2 p.m., examined me like I was roadkill, and declared in her nasal whine, "Listen, vagrant, this is a premium community now. We have standards you clearly can't meet." The chemical stink of fresh paint couldn't mask the arrogance poisoning the air as she refused to discuss anything, threatened police for harassment, then slammed the door hard enough to crack the frame. Standing on her pretentious doorstep surrounded by fake Roman columns and plastic flowers, I realized this entitled witch planned to steal my family's legacy through pure intimidation. She picked the wrong oil rig veteran to mess with. Priscilla wasted exactly 0 time launching her first assault. 3 days after our doorstep encounter, she called an emergency HOA board meeting, which consisted of her husband Richard, 2 other developer wives who owed their McMansions to his company, and enough fake authority to choke an elephant. The fluorescent lights in the community center buzzed like angry wasps as they rubber-stamped her expedited removal procedure for non-compliant eyesores. Within hours, a certified letter landed in my mailbox from Cromwell and Associates, bottom-feeding lawyers known for aggressive property seizures throughout the county. The thick envelope crackled as I opened it, releasing the stench of legal intimidation. "Cease occupancy within 72 hours, it demanded, or face immediate asset forfeiture and criminal trespass charges. I'll admit my hands shook slightly as I read that garbage. Not from fear, from pure rage at the audacity. But 30 years dodging death on oil rigs teaches you to think clearly under pressure. I grabbed my thermos of black coffee and drove straight to the county courthouse where the musty smell of old legal documents and squeaking wooden floors reminded me why I preferred working outdoors. That's where Dolores became my guardian angel. "Thad, honey, look at this," she whispered, pulling out a dusty file cabinet that groaned like an old man's knees. Her wrinkled fingers traced the Lakeside Estates HOA and corporation papers, pointing out discrepancies that made my pulse quicken. "See these property boundaries? They mysteriously expanded overnight to include homes that existed decades before this HOA was even a twinkle in someone's greedy eye." The smoking gun was right there in black and white, forged signatures on documents claiming authority over pre-existing properties. These parasites had literally drawn new lines on maps and declared themselves kings of land they'd never owned. I remembered reading somewhere that most property disputes stem from HOAs exceeding their legal jurisdiction through intimidation rather than legitimate power, especially when dealing with properties that predate the association. I called my old rig buddy Marcus, who'd become a paralegal after a crane accident ended his offshore career. 20 minutes later, he was laughing so hard I could hear him snorting through the phone. "Thad, these idiots just handed you their heads on a silver platter," he wheezed between chuckles. "HOA never properly acquired easement rights over your property. They're claiming authority they don't legally possess." Marcus filed a counter motion that afternoon challenging the HOA's entire legal standing. Here's the beautiful part, and this was something I learned from watching too many courthouse dramas. Legal filings automatically freeze all enforcement actions pending court review. Priscilla's 72-hour ultimatum just became worthless paper. But Princess Priscilla doesn't handle rejection well. The next morning, she roared up to my cabin in her Lexus with 2 security guards wearing black polo shirts and intimidating scowls. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with her suffocating perfume as she strutted across my property like she owned it. "Stop hiding behind legal technicalities, you pathetic loser!" she shrieked, her voice carrying across the lake like fingernails on a chalkboard. "These gentlemen are here to escort you off HOA property." I stepped onto my porch holding my morning coffee, completely calm. "Ma'am, first of all, this is private property that's been in my family for 70 years. Second, those gentlemen just committed unlawful trespass the moment they stepped foot on my land." The security guards exchanged uncomfortable glances. Professional muscle knows when a job crosses legal lines. One of them mumbled something about checking with headquarters and started backing toward their truck. That's when my neighbor Floyd appeared on his porch. This Korean War veteran has survived worse than Priscilla's tantrums, and his weathered face showed exactly zero intimidation as he watched the circus unfold. The crunch of dead leaves under his boots was the only sound as he walked to his property line. Priscilla whirled around like a rabid coyote. "Your decrepit shack is next, old man. I'll have this entire shoreline cleared of trash within the month." Floyd's response was delivered in the same tone he probably used calling artillery strikes 60 years ago. "Lady, I've been shot at by people scarier than you. Good luck with that." Other neighbors started emerging from their cabins, cell phones recording every word of Priscilla's meltdown. The click of cameras and rustle of curious voices created a growing audience for her public humiliation. I started keeping detailed logs of every interaction, timestamps, witnesses, photos of Priscilla's own code violations like her illegal dock extension and unpermitted gazebo. Marcus had drilled into me that documentation beats accusations every single time in court, and I was building an ironclad case. But here's where Priscilla's arrogance really backfired. She posted her little tantrum on the Concerned Lakeside Residents Facebook group, complete with photos of my unsightly cabin and demands for community support against the dangerous vagrant threatening property values. The comments section exploded, but not the way she expected. Longtime residents defended my family's reputation, shared stories of my grandfather helping neighbors during tough times, and started asking uncomfortable questions about HOA finances and legal authority. Her social media strategy just turned into a public relations disaster. Priscilla's next attack came like a snake strike at dawn. I was enjoying my coffee, watching a great blue heron hunt in the shallows, when her white Lexus came screeching up my gravel drive, followed by a beat-up Honda that looked like it survived 3 hurricanes. Out climbed Priscilla and some sweaty guy in an ill-fitting suit carrying a clipboard like it was a weapon. "This is Randy Hutchins, certified HOA inspector," she announced, her shrill voice scaring the heron into flight. Randy reeked of cheap cologne and nervous sweat as he immediately started measuring my dock without so much as a hello. "Ma'am, you can't just trespass and start measuring my property," I said, setting down my coffee with deliberate calm. "Not without legal authority." "We don't need permission," Priscilla shrieked, her face turning red as fresh sunburn. "We have easement rights. Randy, measure everything. Dock, cabin, that hideous shed." The metal measuring tape clicked and whirred as Randy stretched it across my pier, hands shaking when I stepped closer. "Buddy," I said quietly, "unless you've got a warrant, you're committing criminal trespass. And my security cameras are recording every second." That's when I unleashed my counter-strike. I pulled out my phone and called the county building department. "I'd like to request an official property inspection, please. Someone's making false claims about code violations." 2 hours later, Dave Morrison arrived in an official county truck carrying legitimate equipment and 40 years of construction experience etched in his weathered face. The sound of his professional measuring tools and the scratch of official paperwork created a beautiful contrast to Randy's amateur hour performance. Dave spent an hour examining my cabin, occasionally whistling at my grandfather's craftsmanship. "Mr. Brennan, this is museum-quality construction. Your grandfather built this place like a fortress, exceeds every modern code by 50%. His official report landed on my kitchen table with the satisfying weight of government authority. Property in full compliance, no violations found, structure sound for next century. Randy Hutchins vanished like morning fog after that, but Princess Priscilla was just warming up. A week later, while I was replacing dock planks, a utility truck rumbled up my drive. 2 confused workers climbed out, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Sorry, sir, we've got a disconnect order," the foreman said apologetically. "Someone reported unauthorized electrical hookup." I disappeared into my cabin and returned with a manila folder containing my family's 1952 utility agreement. The paper yellowed with age, but the signatures still bold. "Gentlemen, my grandfather signed this contract before most of these McMansions were even dreamed of." The foreman examined the documents, then radioed dispatch. "Yeah, this customer's got legitimate service from 1952. Someone's been lying to us." As they drove away, he rolled down his window. "That crazy lady's been calling everyone. Electric, water, fire department. You might want to file harassment charges." That evening, I found myself in the courthouse basement at midnight, surrounded by musty archives and humming fluorescent lights. My cold coffee sat forgotten as I pulled original 1949 plat maps that revealed something explosive. The lake bed itself, all 2,000 acres of underwater land, belonged to the county, not any private developer. Every fancy dock, every waterfront improvement built without proper county permits. I borrowed Floyd's fishing drone the next morning, and the aerial footage revealed Priscilla's $1 million mansion encroaching 15 feet into protected county wetlands. When I showed Marcus the video evidence, he started laughing so hard he nearly fell off his chair. "Thad, our HOA queen just stepped into a federal bear trap. Environmental Protection Agency doesn't mess around. Automatic $50,000 daily fines, and claiming ignorance won't help her." Meanwhile, Floyd organized what he called Old Eagle Lake Liberation Front meeting at the VFW Hall. Folding chairs squeaked as 12 harassed families gathered around coffee that could dissolve paint, sharing horror stories that would make your blood boil. 82-year-old Mrs. Patterson faced fines for garden gnomes. Disabled veteran Tom Rodriguez got threatened for parking his work truck in his own driveway. The pattern was crystal clear: systematic ethnic and class-based harassment targeting anyone who didn't fit Priscilla's country club delusion. But here's where Priscilla made her biggest mistake yet. She showed up at our VFW meeting uninvited, bursting through the door like an angry tornado in tennis whites. "What kind of conspiracy are you people planning?" she demanded, designer heels clicking on linoleum as every conversation stopped dead. Floyd stood up slowly, his Korean War veteran's posture straightening to attention. "Ma'am, this is a legally noticed public meeting on VFW property. You're the one trespassing here." The smell of stale cigarettes and burnt coffee couldn't hide the electricity in the air as 20 sets of eyes focused on this entitled witch who'd made everyone's life miserable. "You can't intimidate us with your meetings and your lawyers," Priscilla shrieked, pointing accusing fingers at faces that had seen real hardship. "I'll shut down this whole conspiracy." Floyd's response was delivered in the same tone he probably used reporting enemy positions 60 years ago. "Lady, this isn't your country club. Time to leave." The room erupted in applause as Priscilla stormed out, her threats echoing off concrete walls. Priscilla's nuclear meltdown came at dawn on a Thursday, and it was absolutely beautiful to witness. I was out on my dock at sunrise, hammer echoing across Eagle Lake's glass surface as I replaced weathered planks. Morning mist drifted between the pines while sawdust floated on gentle ripples. Pure tranquility until the screech of tires shattered everything. Priscilla's white Lexus came rocketing up my gravel drive like a guided missile, dust cloud billowing behind her. She exploded out of the car before it fully stopped, designer heels clicking frantically on my dock planks as her face contorted with pure rage. "I warned you," she shrieked, voice cracking like breaking glass. "You're destroying our community with this illegal vandalism." The woman looked completely unhinged, hair wild, yesterday's tennis outfit wrinkled, makeup smeared like she'd been crying all night. The stench of stale perfume and desperation hung around her like a toxic fog. "Ma'am, I'm repairing my own dock," I said calmly, gesturing to the obvious maintenance work. "Same as my family's done for 70 years. "Not anymore." She fumbled for her phone with shaking hands. 911, emergency. There's a violent vagrant destroying lakefront property with weapons. The dispatcher's voice carried across the morning air. "What's your location, ma'am?" "Eagle Lake. This maniac is using power tools to vandalize community property," Priscilla screamed, pointing at my simple hammer like it was a chainsaw. "He threatened me. Send SWAT!" I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Deputy Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later, stepping out of his cruiser with the weary expression of someone who'd answered too many bogus calls. Radio static mixed with morning birdsong as he surveyed the scene. Me standing peacefully beside legitimate dock repairs. Priscilla pacing like a rabid animal. "Got a report about property destruction?" he asked, already looking skeptical. I handed him my property deed, permits, and detailed work log. "Deputy, just maintaining my family dock. Been doing this since I was 12. Priscilla bounced on her toes like an agitated cheerleader. "That's impossible. This is HOA property. Arrest him now." Deputy Rodriguez examined my documents while his radio crackled with other calls. "Ma'am, this gentleman's working on his own property with proper documentation." "Do your job!" Priscilla's voice hit frequencies that could crack windows. "I'm calling the state police to report your corruption." That's when the deputy dropped the bombshell that made Priscilla's world collapse. "Ma'am, you should know that Sheriff Morrison is actually Thad's cousin. They grew up together right here on Eagle Lake." The blood drained from Priscilla's face so fast I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed like a dying fish as the reality hit. She'd been threatening a man whose family had deep roots in local law enforcement, but instead of backing down, Priscilla doubled down on crazy. "Conspiracy!" she screamed, whipping out her phone to record. "Police corruption, nepotism. I'm exposing this whole criminal network." Her phone camera clicked frantically as she documented her own public breakdown. "Ma'am, step back or face harassment charges," Deputy Rodriguez warned, hand moving toward his radio. "Filing false reports is a crime." That's when Floyd appeared with perfect timing, carrying his toolbox and wearing the kind of grin that said he'd been watching this circus from his kitchen window. "Morning, Deputy. Thought Thad might need help finishing this dock." 3 more neighbors emerged from their cabins with tools and coffee, creating an instant work party. The sound of multiple hammers, friendly conversation, and genuine laughter demonstrated exactly the community spirit Priscilla claimed to want, but systematically destroyed. As neighbors rallied around me, Priscilla realized she was completely outmatched. Gravel scattered as she stormed back to her Lexus, screaming threats about connections and powerful friends who would destroy this whole corrupt town. Her final act of desperation came that afternoon, illegally posting Deputy Rodriguez's body cam footage on social media with the caption, Corrupt police protect criminals at Eagle Lake. The high-definition video showed her hysteria in all its unhinged glory, while I calmly repaired my dock and the deputy maintained professional composure. But social media is a double-edged sword. Comments flooded in supporting the deputy's patience and questioning Priscilla's sanity. Local news picked up the HOA Karen calls 911 on Hammer story, and suddenly our quiet lake was getting statewide attention as a symbol of HOA overreach. The county attorney filed harassment charges against Priscilla within days. Turns out repeatedly filing false police reports and publicly slandering law enforcement officers carries serious legal consequences. That evening, my phone rang with the call that would change everything. Marcus could barely contain his excitement as he delivered news that made my pulse quicken. "Thad, you're going to want to sit down for this. I've been digging through old land records, and I found something that'll blow your mind. Remember how your great-grandfather filed mining claims back in the 1890s? Well, those mineral rights were never properly transferred when the state took over. Legally speaking, your family doesn't just own that cabin, you own the entire lake bed. Thad, you need to get down to the courthouse basement, now." Dolores's voice was shaking when she called at 10 p.m., and in 30 years of knowing her, I'd never heard the county clerk sound rattled. The urgency in her whisper made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. "What's wrong, Dolores?" "I was filing some old mineral rights transfers when I found something that'll knock you flat. Remember how you mentioned your great-grandfather's mining operation? I pulled his original 1890s land grant from the Territorial Archives." My heart started pounding as I grabbed my jacket. 20 minutes later, I was descending into the courthouse basement, where the musty smell of century-old documents mixed with the hum of ancient fluorescent lights that flickered like dying candles. Dolores was waiting beside a metal filing cabinet that looked older than civilization, wearing rubber gloves and handling papers like they were made of gold leaf. Her weathered hands trembled as she spread yellow documents across a wooden table that groaned under the weight of history. "Look at this legal description," she whispered, pointing to faded ink that had somehow survived 130 years. "Your great-grandfather didn't just file a mining claim, he claimed subsurface rights to 2,000 acres, including the entire lake bed." The blood in my veins turned to ice water as I read the territorial seal, the precise legal boundaries, the official signatures that predated statehood itself. The smell of old leather and deteriorating paper couldn't mask the electricity of this moment. "Dolores, what are you telling me?" Her voice dropped to barely audible. "Thad, honey, the state never properly acquired these rights when they took over lake administration in 1925. Your family's mining claim is still legally valid under territorial law." The room started spinning as the implications crashed over me like a tsunami. Every luxury mansion, every fancy development, every piece of Priscilla's empire, all built on land that legally belonged to my family. "You mean," I could barely form the words, "Eagle Lake's entire bed, all subsurface mineral rights, water usage authority, and development permissions for the whole district?" Dolores's eyes were wide behind her thick glasses. "Under adverse possession laws, 130 years of continuous family presence makes your claim ironclad." I sank into a creaky wooden chair as the magnitude hit me. The Vandermeers hadn't just harassed me, they'd built their fortune on stolen land. Every property deed, every development permit, every luxury home was technically fraudulent. Priscilla's husband owed millions in retroactive land use fees, and she'd personally signed corporate documents as secretary, making her criminally liable for knowing fraud. "There's more," Dolores continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Every building permit issued in the district should have required your family's permission for subsurface development. The county's been collecting property taxes on land that was never properly transferred from your original claim." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I stared at documents that transformed me from harassed retiree to the legal owner of half the county's most valuable real estate. The irony was so perfect it hurt. Priscilla had been screaming about property rights while living on property that belonged to me. But here's what 30 years of dangerous work teaches you. Real power isn't about destruction. It's about knowing when and how to use it. "Dolores, who else knows about this?" "Just you and me, honey. These files haven't been touched in decades." As I carefully gathered the documents, the weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. I could bankrupt the entire development, seize every mansion, destroy lives with the stroke of a pen. Or I could do something better. I could use this leverage to protect my community and ensure that entitled bullies like Priscilla never terrorized working families again. The war was about to shift dramatically, and she had no idea what was coming. My kitchen table looked like the Pentagon's war room had exploded. Maps, legal documents, and coffee-stained notebooks covered every surface, while Marcus spread century-old territorial surveys across my counter. The aroma of industrial-strength coffee mixed with musty paper and determination as we assembled the most unlikely legal team in county history. "We need Sarah Finley," Marcus declared, phone already dialing. "Environmental lawyer who eats corporate polluters for breakfast and picks her teeth with their bones." Sarah arrived in a Honda held together by duct tape and pure willpower, but her sharp mind cut through legal complexity like a chainsaw through butter. She examined our mining documents and let out a whistle that could summon dolphins. "Gentlemen, you're not fighting an HOA, you're correcting the biggest land fraud in state history." The sound of her pen scratching notes harmonized with waves lapping my dock as she outlined our three-pronged attack. Establish mineral rights through quiet title action, demolish HOA's fraudulent corporate charter, and trigger federal environmental prosecutions that would make the Vandermeers wish they'd never heard of Eagle Lake. Building our team felt like recruiting for a heist movie. Sarah brought in Tommy, a baby-faced paralegal who organized evidence with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Marcus dragged in his fishing buddy Jake, a retired forensic accountant who could follow money through more twists than a pretzel factory. "HOA books are cooked worse than Thanksgiving turkey," Jake announced, spreading financial records across my table like tarot cards of corporate doom. His finger traced money flows that would make a mob lawyer blush. Members pay premium fees for phantom amenities while their cash flows straight into Vandermeer's legal slush fund. The numbers revealed systematic fraud. Residents funded their own harassment through inflated assessments that violated every transparency law on the books. I remembered learning that HOAs must provide detailed financial disclosures, but these crooks had been treating community funds like their personal ATM. Meanwhile, Floyd transformed the VFW hall into intelligence headquarters, recruiting neighbors who'd been documenting abuses with the dedication of war correspondents. The smell of burnt coffee and righteous anger filled the air as evidence boxes multiplied like rabbits. "Mrs. Patterson's got enough receipts to wallpaper the courthouse," Floyd reported with military precision. "Discriminatory fines, threatening letters, selective enforcement. We've documented every crime they committed." Sarah's drone surveys revealed environmental destruction that would give EPA investigators Christmas morning feelings. Professional-grade footage showed Priscilla's mansion squatting on protected wetlands, like a parasite on healthy tissue, while illegal dock extensions violated federal waterway protections. $50,000 per day per violation with personal liability for corporate officers, Sarah explained while we watched high-definition evidence of federal crimes. "The Vandermeers will owe more money than some countries' GDP. But the real nuclear weapon came courtesy of Floyd's nephew, County Commissioner Pete, who quietly shared intelligence that made everyone's eyes light up like slot machines hitting jackpot. Priscilla had offered him cash bribes for favorable HOA rulings, not realizing she was attempting to corrupt the one politician in the county who actually read ethics manuals. "State Attorney General prosecutes public corruption like it's a blood sport," Sarah noted with predatory satisfaction. "Recorded evidence plus willing testimony equals career-ending felony convictions." Our media strategy required surgical precision. Sarah's contact, a reformed newspaper editor who understood small-town dynamics, helped craft messaging that positioned us as community protectors rather than legal terrorists. "Veteran saves neighbors from corporate land pirates," she suggested during our evening strategy session. Laptop screens glowed in my cabin's warm light as we polished talking points. "David versus Goliath plays better than local man owns half the county." By week's end, my modest cabin resembled NASA mission control. Legal timelines covered walls like battle maps, evidence boxes filled every spare corner, and filing schedules were synchronized with military precision. The plan demanded perfect timing. Federal referrals, state prosecutions, and civil actions launching simultaneously to prevent asset liquidation or evidence destruction. "One chance for maximum devastation," Sarah emphasized, her courtroom experience adding gravity to every word. "The moment we file, they'll start burning documents and hiding money in offshore accounts. Everything happens at once or not at all." The hardest part was accepting public exposure. 3 decades of oil rig anonymity had taught me to avoid spotlights. but this fight required visibility. During a contemplative evening on my dock, with loons serenading the sunset and starlight beginning to dance on dark water, Floyd delivered the wisdom that changed everything. Son, sometimes good men have to stand up publicly so other good men know they ain't fighting alone. Looking across the lake at neighbors' lights, families enjoying peaceful evenings for the first time since the HOA terror began, I understood this transcended personal comfort. Every lit window represented someone who deserved protection from entitled bullies and corporate thieves. As we finalized preparations, I felt the calm focus that comes before dangerous work begins. The Vandermeers thought they were fighting a broke retiree with a rusty truck. They had no idea they'd picked a war with someone who owned the battlefield. Priscilla's desperation reached psychotic levels the moment she realized something big was brewing. Her first act of sabotage came at dawn on a Monday, announced by the brutal roar of a chainsaw that shattered the morning peace like a sonic boom. I stumbled out of bed to find some contractor in reflective gear systematically destroying my dock with what looked like professional demolition equipment. The smell of gasoline and sawdust filled the air as support beams crashed into the lake, sending waves across the previously calm surface. "Hey!" I shouted, pulling on boots and grabbing my phone to record. "What the hell are you doing?" The contractor looked up guiltily, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Sorry, sir. Work order says this dock extends into HOA navigation channel. Lady said make it look like storm damage." My security cameras had captured everything, including Priscilla's white Lexus parked behind the tree line, and audio of her directing the operation like some deranged construction foreman. "Cut those support posts first," her voice screeched through my speakers. "Make sure it collapses completely." Marcus filed police reports within the hour, accompanied by high-definition video evidence that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Felony destruction of property, conspiracy charges, and criminal trespass, all documented in beautiful 4K resolution with crystal-clear audio. "She just handed us everything we need for serious jail time," Marcus chuckled while copying files to multiple backup drives. "Nothing says criminal intent like directing sabotage operations on camera." But Priscilla's crime spree was just getting started. 2 days later, County Commissioner Pete called with news that made my blood pressure spike into the stratosphere. "Thad, you're not going to believe this, but that crazy woman just tried to bribe me with $50,000 cash for favorable HOA boundary rulings." The meeting had occurred at Murphy's Diner, where the smell of bacon grease and corruption apparently mixed poorly. Priscilla had slid an envelope across the vinyl booth table, whispering about development partnership opportunities and mutual beneficial arrangements, while Pete sat there in stunned disbelief. "I've been recording conversations since the harassment started," Pete admitted, his voice shaking with anger. "State Attorney General is opening a full investigation into public corruption and conspiracy charges." Meanwhile, Priscilla launched her most vicious attack yet, a character assassination campaign that targeted my military service with lies so outrageous they bordered on libelous. Whispered conversations at the grocery store suggested I had violent PTSD episodes and posed a clear danger to community safety. The irony burned like acid. This entitled witch who'd never faced real hardship was questioning the mental stability of someone who'd served his country with honor. But her smear campaign backfired spectacularly when the local VFW post caught wind of her slander. 23 veterans showed up at my cabin that evening, led by Floyd and carrying enough American flags to outfit a parade. The sound of gravel crunching under military-issued boots mixed with determined voices as they formed an honor guard around my property. "Nobody attacks our brothers," announced Sergeant Major Rodriguez, a man whose chest decorations could fill a museum. "Especially not some Dallas princess who thinks patriotism is a fashion accessory." Their presence sent a clear message that echoed across the lake. Mess with one veteran, face them all. But Priscilla's most desperate gambit involved weaponizing utility companies with fabricated environmental impact studies. She convinced electric and water providers to demand right-of-way fees and ecological assessments that would have cost thousands in engineering consultations. That's when my mineral rights discovery paid the first dividend. "Ma'am," the utility supervisor explained to Priscilla over speakerphone while I listened with growing satisfaction, "we've discovered that Mr. Brennan actually owns the subsurface easement rights for this entire area. Legally, we should be paying him for access, not the other way around." The silence on her end was so complete I thought the call had dropped. Within days, utility companies were apologizing for the harassment and offering to renegotiate agreements that had been in my family's favor all along. The smell of sweet revenge mixed with morning coffee as I signed contracts that would generate steady income while protecting neighbors from similar utility extortion. By Friday, Priscilla had escalated to sending compliance officers to harass elderly residents with demands for immediate payment of special emergency assessments to fund legal battles against community threats. These hired thugs targeted the most vulnerable neighbors with intimidation tactics that crossed every line of human decency. Mrs. Patterson called me in tears after two men in suits demanded $5,000 for legal defense contributions, while implying that refusal would result in immediate eviction proceedings. The sound of her shaking voice over the phone triggered protective instincts I didn't know still existed. "These assessments are completely illegal," Sarah confirmed when I forwarded the threatening letters. "Special assessments require proper notice, community voting, and legitimate purpose. This is nothing but extortion with fancy letterhead." But Priscilla had made one crucial error in her escalating desperation. She'd forgotten that cornered veterans don't surrender. They fight back harder. Priscilla's final desperate gambit came wrapped in legal papers that reeked of pure panic. Thursday morning, a process server knocked on my door looking embarrassed as he handed me an emergency restraining order that read like the fever dream of a deranged person. According to Priscilla's sworn affidavit, I was assembling a dangerous militia and planning armed insurrection against lawful community authority. The document claimed I'd been stockpiling weapons and recruiting violent extremists to overthrow the HOA through domestic terrorism. I actually laughed out loud reading it. The closest thing to weaponry on my property was a rusty tackle box and some fishing lures that could arguably constitute cruel and unusual punishment for bass. "This woman's completely lost her mind," Marcus muttered, studying the restraining order like it was written in hieroglyphics. "She's claiming your VFW buddies constitute a paramilitary organization plotting violent overthrow of suburban governance." The emergency hearing was scheduled for Friday morning in Judge Catherine Morrison's courtroom, a venue that would prove monumentally unfortunate for Priscilla's legal strategy. Judge Morrison happened to be Sheriff Morrison's sister, and both had known my family since childhood. The courtroom smelled like old wood polish and nervous sweat as Priscilla's lawyer, a slick Dallas attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, attempted to present evidence of my threatening behavior. His voice cracked slightly as he described my tactical meetings at the VFW hall and recruitment of military-trained insurgents. Judge Morrison's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline as she examined photographs of Floyd's neighborhood barbecue, labeled in the filing as militia training exercises. The sound of stifled laughter from the gallery grew louder when they presented my dock repair project as evidence of fortification construction. My character witnesses told a different story. 12 veterans testified about my peaceful nature, community service, and habit of helping elderly neighbors with grocery runs. Floyd's testimony was particularly devastating to Priscilla's narrative. "Your Honor, if helping Mrs. Patterson with her garden and organizing potluck dinners makes someone a domestic terrorist, then I guess we're all in trouble," Floyd said with military bearing that commanded respect. But the real moment of truth came when Priscilla's own witnesses failed to materialize. Her supposed community supporters had apparently developed sudden cases of selective amnesia when faced with possible perjury charges. Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and brutal. This restraining order appears to be filed in bad faith to harass the defendant. Motion denied with prejudice. Ms. Vandermeer, I'm warning you about filing frivolous legal documents in my courtroom. The gavel's bang echoed like thunder as Priscilla's face turned colors I didn't know human skin could achieve. Meanwhile, Sarah's forensic accounting team had discovered the smoking gun we'd been hunting. Systematic asset transfer operations designed to hide Vandermeer Development's wealth before legal consequences arrived. Shell companies with names like Lakeside Holdings and Eagle Investment Trust were gobbling up properties and liquidating assets faster than sharks in a feeding frenzy. "Classic fraudulent conveyance," Sarah explained while spreading financial records across my kitchen table like evidence of murder. "They're trying to hide assets from creditors and legal judgments. Problem is, we've documented every transaction with timestamps." The media circus was reaching national proportions. Cable news had picked up the HOA Karen versus oil rig veteran story, and Priscilla's disastrous television interview became instant internet gold. The smell of fame mixed with morning coffee as reporters called for comments on the David versus Goliath at Eagle Lake story. Priscilla's TV appearance was a masterclass in self-destruction. Her entitled attitude, condescending tone, and obvious disdain for lower-class residents played exactly as you'd expect on social media. Within hours, #JusticeForThad was trending nationally while #Karen Vandermeer became shorthand for HOA abuse. But the real nail in her coffin came when EPA investigators arrived to assess environmental violations. Their preliminary report read like an ecological horror story. Wetlands destruction exceeded worst-case estimates, water contamination threatened the entire lake ecosystem, and illegal construction had damaged fish spawning grounds that took decades to establish. $2.3 million in fines, the lead investigator announced while examining drone footage of environmental crimes, plus mandatory ecosystem restoration that could cost another $5 million. Criminal referrals to federal prosecutors are automatic at this level of damage. Priscilla's social isolation was becoming complete. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. The country club had indefinitely postponed her membership, and her husband's business partners were demanding her removal from all corporate positions to limit their liability exposure. The woman who'd terrorized an entire community with threats and harassment now couldn't buy groceries without facing hostile stares and whispered conversations about federal prison sentences. That evening, as I sat on my rebuilt dock watching sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus called with the final piece of our legal puzzle. Sarah's team finished the title search. Your mineral rights claim is bulletproof. The environmental crimes are documented beyond any reasonable doubt, and federal prosecutors are salivating over the corruption charges. Everything's ready for tomorrow's county commission meeting. The sound of loons calling across darkening water mixed with distant laughter from a neighbor's deck as I realized this nightmare was finally approaching its end. Priscilla had spent months trying to drive me from my family's land. Tomorrow she'd discover exactly who really owned Eagle Lake. The county commission meeting room was packed tighter than a sardine can, with standing room only and tension you could cut with a chainsaw. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with fresh coffee as cameras from 3 television stations positioned themselves for maximum drama. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of curious onlookers while the air conditioning struggled against the heat of assembled humanity. I arrived wearing my cleanest flannel shirt and pressed jeans, accompanied by Floyd and a dozen veterans who looked like they'd rather face enemy fire than deal with bureaucratic proceedings. The respectful nods and firm handshakes from longtime residents created a stark contrast to the whispered conversations and pointed stares directed at our opposition. Priscilla made her entrance like she was arriving at the Academy Awards, flanked by 3 lawyers in $1,000 suits and wearing enough jewelry to fund a small country's defense budget. Her designer heels clicked on linoleum, with the confidence of someone who still believed money could buy justice. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd dressed for victory while walking into her own execution. Commissioner Pete called the meeting to order with a gavel that sounded like thunder in the packed room. We're here to address property disputes at Eagle Lake, environmental concerns, and certain allegations that have come to our attention. Sarah Finley rose first, her modest appearance hiding the legal nuclear weapon she was about to detonate. The sound of papers rustling filled the silence as she arranged documents with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment in her dreams. Commissioners, we're here to present evidence of systematic fraud, environmental crimes, and the largest illegal land seizure in county history. The projector screen flickered to life, displaying the 1890s territorial mining claim that had started everything. Gasps echoed through the chamber as the historical significance became clear. My family's legal ownership predated every modern property division by decades. For 130 years, the Brennan family has maintained continuous presence on Eagle Lake, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the authority of absolute legal certainty. Under territorial law and adverse possession statutes, their mineral rights claim supersedes all subsequent property transfers. Priscilla jumped up like she'd been electrocuted. This is ridiculous. You can't overturn decades of legitimate development based on some moldy old papers. Judge Morrison, attending as county legal advisor, examined the documents with the thoroughness of someone who understood their explosive implications. Ms. Finley, are you stating that the entire Lakeside Estates development was built without proper subsurface permissions? That's exactly what I'm stating, Your Honor. Every luxury home, every development project, every property transfer in the district violated established mineral rights that were never legally extinguished. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as the magnitude hit home. Camera flashes popped like strobe lights while reporters scribbled frantically, recognizing they were witnessing legal history in the making. But Sarah wasn't finished. The environmental violations came next. Drone footage showing wetlands destruction that would make conservationists weep. The high-definition images of Priscilla's mansion squatting on protected habitat drew audible gasps from the audience. $2.3 million in EPA fines, Sarah announced with the satisfaction of someone delivering well-deserved justice. Plus criminal referral to federal prosecutors for knowingly violating environmental protection laws. That's when Sheriff Morrison made his appearance, accompanied by 2 deputies carrying arrest warrants that crackled with official authority. The sound of handcuffs being prepared mixed with Priscilla's increasingly hysterical protests. Richard and Priscilla Vandermeer, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, filing false documents, environmental crimes, and attempted bribery of a public official. Priscilla's meltdown was spectacular. This is a conspiracy! Corruption! You people can't do this to me! Her voice cracked as reality crashed down like a collapsing building. The handcuffs clicked with the finality of justice as she was read her rights in front of cameras that would broadcast her humiliation across the nation. Her perfectly styled hair looked disheveled. Her makeup ran in streaks, and her entitled arrogance finally crumbled under the weight of legal consequences. But the most satisfying moment came when I approached the podium to address the commission. The room fell silent as I looked out at faces that represented my community. Neighbors who'd suffered under HOA tyranny, families who'd been threatened and intimidated, elderly residents who'd lived in fear. Commissioners, I'd like to discuss my family's land donation to the county. The announcement hit like lightning. After establishing my legal ownership of half the county's most valuable real estate, I was giving it back to protect the community that had supported me. I'm deeding lake access rights and environmental protection authority to the county with one condition: permanent protection for working families and an end to discriminatory harassment of longtime residents. The standing ovation was thunderous. Cheers mixed with tears as neighbors who'd fought beside me celebrated not just legal victory, but the restoration of community values over corporate greed. Floyd wiped his eyes with the back of his weathered hand. Your grandfather would be proud, son. As the Vandermeers were led away in handcuffs, past cameras and crowd jeers, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from protecting people who matter. Sometimes justice isn't just served, it's delivered with a bow on top. 6 months later, Eagle Lake had transformed into something beautiful. A real community instead of Priscilla's sterile country club nightmare. The annual Eagle Lake Freedom Festival was in full swing, with the smell of barbecue smoke drifting across water that sparkled cleaner than it had in years. Children's laughter mixed with bluegrass music as families who'd survived the HOA terror enjoyed their first peaceful summer in half a decade. I was manning the volunteer burger booth, happily anonymous again in my flannel shirt and work boots, when a reporter from the regional news station approached with that hungry look journalists get when they smell a follow-up story. Mr. Brennan, any regrets about giving away millions in property rights? I flipped another burger, watching the grease sizzle and pop. Son, some things are worth more than money. Look around. This is what community looks like. The Vandermeer saga had reached its predictable conclusion with the satisfying thud of justice served cold. Richard Vandermeer drew 5 years in federal prison plus $3 million in restitution for fraud, environmental crimes, and racketeering. Priscilla got 2 years, anger management classes, and 1,000 hours of community service that she'd have to complete in the very neighborhoods she'd terrorized. Their assets had been seized to pay victims and fund environmental restoration, while their development company dissolved like sugar in rain. The McMansion that once squatted on protected wetlands was demolished. The land returned to its natural state where herons could fish without dodging illegal docks. But the real victory was watching our community heal. The Eagle Lake Residents Association met monthly in the restored community center, where the smell of fresh coffee mixed with friendly voices planning neighborhood projects. No more enforcement officers, no more violation notices, just neighbors helping neighbors the way it should be. Mrs. Patterson's garden gnome stood proud in her flower bed, joined by a hand-carved welcome sign that Floyd had made in his workshop. Tom Rodriguez parked his work truck wherever he pleased, and nobody complained about anything except whether the fish were biting and whose turn it was to organize the next potluck dinner. The crown jewel of our recovery was the Brennan Family Veterans Scholarship, $5,000 annually for military families pursuing education. The funding came from ethical energy companies leasing mineral rights under terms that protected our environment while generating steady community income. This year's first recipient was Floyd's granddaughter, Sarah. studying environmental law at the state university with dreams of protecting places like Eagle Lake from corporate predators. The scholarship ceremony brought tears to eyes that had seen too much injustice over the years. She wants to be a lawyer who fights for communities instead of corporations, Floyd announced proudly, his weathered hands holding the award certificate like it was made of gold. Says she wants to be the next Sarah Finley. The environmental restoration project had become a model for wetlands recovery across the region. Crystal clear water now supported healthy fish populations that attracted fishing enthusiasts from 3 states, while the return of osprey and bald eagles proved that nature could heal when given proper protection. My personal healing was quieter, but just as important. Morning coffee on the dock had regained its peaceful rhythm, with loons calling across mist-covered water, while sunrise painted the sky in shades that no artist could capture. The sound of gentle waves lapping weathered posts mixed with distant laughter as neighbors started their days without fear of harassment or intimidation. Regular fishing trips with fellow veterans provided therapy that no counselor could match. We'd cast our lines in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing stories, but mostly just enjoying the peace we'd all fought to protect in different ways. The documentary about our battle, David versus Goliath at Eagle Lake, won a regional Emmy and sparked similar community organizing efforts across the country. I'd declined Hollywood movie offers, preferring to let the real story inspire people facing their own corporate bullies. But life had one more surprise waiting. Last week, a letter arrived from a disabled veteran in Montana facing similar HOA harassment. His name was Miguel Santos, and his story sounded painfully familiar. Entitled Neighbors Targeting a Military Family Through Discriminatory Enforcement and Intimidation Tactics. Floyd volunteered to help with research, his eyes lighting up with the prospect of another righteous fight. Reckon we could take a road trip, help another good family stand up to these parasites? As I write this, watching sunset paint Eagle Lake in gold and crimson while American flags flutter in the evening breeze, I'm reminded that freedom requires constant vigilance. Sometimes that means standing up to foreign enemies. Sometimes it means facing down domestic bullies who think money makes them untouchable. Drop a comment with your worst HOA nightmare. Let's expose these petty tyrants together and show them that communities united can't be defeated. And hit that subscribe button for more stories of ordinary heroes fighting back against corrupt systems. Because the best way to honor freedom is to defend it, one neighborhood at a time.